There are two types of mothers in this world: those who carry children in their own wombs and those who, like me, take in a child nobody wanted and turn them into blood of their own blood. But sometimes, my dear, love doesn't heal everything. And it was that same motherly love that almost got me killed in my own bed one night. My name is Gertrude Miller, but everyone here in River Creek, Michigan knows me as Miss G, or the woman who adopted the boy from the orphanage. I'm 76 years old now, my dear. And each of these wrinkles on my face tells a different story, some of joy, others of pain that not even time could erase. I still live in this old house on the outskirts of Maple Street, with peeling walls that are still standing against time. From my porch I can see a stretch of the Grand River that cuts through town like a blue vein. That river has seen everything in this life. The joys, the sorrows, and also that day in 1992 that changed my family forever. That was when a woman believed she could save any child with love, even those carrying wounds so deep that not even God could heal them. And you who are listening now, tell me your name, and from what corner of America you're listening to this story that I've kept in my heart for over 30 years. Tell me down in the comments, would you? I'm curious to know how far this old woman's voice from small-town Michigan is reaching. Who knows? Maybe there's someone from River Creek who knows me by sight and never knew about this secret I carry. River Creek isn't a big town, my dear. It's one of those places where time seems to pass more slowly. A region with lots of corn and soybean farms where everybody knows everybody. The main streets are wide, but when you get into the older neighborhoods like mine, they get narrow with crooked sidewalks that make older folks like me watch the ground so we don't fall. You know, we're not in the best shape anymore, my dear. There's an old church, a central square where old men play checkers, and the river that sometimes, when it rains too much, floods the lower houses and takes a bit of the town with it. It was after that flood of 1988 that my late husband Joseph and I decided it was time to grow our family. We already had our two biological children, Paul, who was 17 at the time, and Margaret, who was 15. But I always had this soft heart. You know, I always wanted more children. It was Margaret who gave me the idea. She had gone to do a school project at the St. Clair Children's Home on the other side of town. She came home with eyes red from crying. "Mom, you should see those children. Some have been there for years and nobody wants them because they're too old. Everyone only wants babies." That kept hammering in my head. Joseph, my husband, wasn't one to get emotional, but he always respected my wishes. He worked as a supervisor at the grain elevator. He was a serious man of few words, but with a good heart. When I told him about the idea of adopting an older child, he just looked at me in that way of his, smoking his hand-rolled cigarette on the porch, and said, "If that's what you want, G, let's go see this child." The first time we visited the orphanage, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. Such a clean but terribly sad place. Children should run, jump, make noise. But there, everyone seemed afraid to even breathe too loudly. The director, Miss Clemens, a thin lady with a face like she just sucked a lemon, took us to her office. "Do you have a preference for a boy or girl?" "What age?" she asked. "We want a child who really needs a family," I said, feeling a courage I didn't know I had. One that others might not want to adopt. That's when she first mentioned Roger. "I have a 9-year-old boy. He's been with us since he was 5. He's one of the oldest here. Intelligent but reserved. His mother was a drug user, died of an overdose. Nobody knows who the father is. When I first saw Roger, he was sitting alone in the corner of the yard with an old book in his hand. A skinny boy with short black straight hair, big dark eyes that seemed to swallow the world. He didn't smile when we were introduced, just looked at us, studying us like a suspicious little animal. He doesn't talk much," explained Miss Clemens, "but he's intelligent, gets good grades in school. He just has difficulty relating to the other children." At that moment, my mother's heart had already decided. That boy needed a family. He needed me. Joseph, who was by my side, squeezed my hand. He had felt something too. The adoption process wasn't easy. It never is. There were interviews, visits from the social worker to our house, endless paperwork. But I was determined. In 4 months, Roger was at home with us with a small backpack containing everything he had in the world. Some clothes, a storybook, and an old plastic toy car. At first, he was so quiet that sometimes I forgot he was in the house. He stayed in the room he shared with Paul, who didn't like it one bit. But I said it was just until we fixed up the back room. He barely spoke during meals, eating while looking at his plate as if afraid someone would take the food away from him. Little by little, I tried to get close to him. I made dishes he liked. I discovered he loved spaghetti with meat sauce. I bought books since I noticed that's what he liked to do most. I sat next to him in the living room while he watched TV. In the beginning, he would shrink away when I came near, as if expecting something bad. It broke my heart to see that. The first time he smiled at me was when he had been with us for a month. I had made a chocolate cake to celebrate with a little candle. Kind of a silly idea, but I wanted to mark the date. 1 month of our Roger in the family, I said. He looked at me with those big eyes, surprised, and a small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. It was small, timid, but it was there. Joseph, who was at the head of the table, also saw it and gave me a little wink. That night, I thought everything would be all right, that we had made the right choice. Roger started going to the neighborhood school. The first months were difficult. He'd come home with torn notebooks, sometimes with a black eye or a scraped knee. "What happened?" I'd ask, heart tight. "Nothing," he always answered, eyes down. It was the teacher, Miss Helen, who told me that the other boys picked on him, calling him an orphan, a nobody's child. Things that only cruel children can come up with to hurt. "But he doesn't react," she told me concerned. "He stays quiet, takes it all in." "That's not normal, Mrs. Miller. Most children cry, fight, tell an adult. He seems disconnected. With time, things began to change, but not the way I expected." Roger remained quiet at home, but at school, the teacher started complaining about other problems. She said he had explosions of anger over small things, a broken pencil, a book he couldn't find. He would cry suddenly without apparent reason or stare into nothing for minutes on end. I tried to talk to him, but it was like talking to a wall. Joseph, my husband, was already starting to get impatient. "He needs rules, G. You spoil the boy too much." But how could I not spoil him? I looked at that thin little face, at those eyes that seemed to carry a weight too big for a 9-year-old child, and all I could think about was how to make him feel loved, safe. Oh, my dear, if you're enjoying this story of overcoming, give a little help to the Grandparents' Tales channel. Would you just click the like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of our stories? This old grandma is very happy to know there are people who want to hear what I have to tell. Now, let's continue, because this story still has much to be revealed. There are things we don't like to remember, but that need to be told so that other people don't go through the same. One day, when Roger had been with us for almost a year, he came home from school later than usual. It was almost night, and I was already worried, thinking of going out to look for him. When he came through the door, he had an ugly cut on his chin, and his uniform shirt was torn. "My God, boy, what happened?" I asked, running to examine the wound. For the first time since he had arrived, he exploded. He threw his backpack on the floor with such force that the books scattered across the entire living room. They said, "You only adopted me because you get money from the government." They said, "Nobody would really want an old boy like me." I was speechless for a few seconds, watching that boy who was always so controlled, finally releasing the anger he kept inside. Then, without thinking twice, I hugged him tight. At first, he went stiff as a board. Then, slowly, he relaxed until he began to cry. Such a deep suffering cry that seemed to come from deep inside his soul. "You are my son," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "My son of the heart, and there's no government money. There's love. You're a Miller now, and nobody's going to take you away from us." That night seemed like a turning point, as if something inside him had broken and allowed us to finally enter. He began to talk more during dinner, to tell us about school, to ask questions about the family. Joseph also got closer, teaching him how to fix things around the house, to fish in the river on weekends. How wrong I was, my dear. How blind we can be when we want to believe in something too much. Because what I didn't know was that this was just the beginning of a story that would become increasingly difficult and that would end in a night that would change our family forever. You know, my dear, there's something I only learned after I got old. Sometimes our love is like a blindfold over our eyes. It makes us ignore what's right in front of us. Those signs that destiny sends warning that something is wrong happening under our own roof. When Roger turned 11, he had been with us for almost 2 years. It seemed like things were finally getting on track. The boy had grown a few inches, had gained some weight. He was no longer that skinny child who arrived with the small backpack and frightened eyes. At school, his grades were good, not excellent like in the beginning, but he maintained an average. The teachers no longer sent notes complaining about strange behavior, and he had even made 2 friends in the neighborhood, Tony and Mark, who sometimes came to play at our house. It was around this time that my Paul, the oldest son, married Louise and moved to Detroit. Margaret also left home to study nursing in Chicago. Suddenly, it was just me, Joseph, and Roger in that house that before seemed so cramped and now became too big. I wonder if that's what messed with the boy's head, seeing the siblings leave, even though they had never been very close. Maybe he felt like he was being abandoned again. The first things I began to notice were small but strange objects in the house that disappeared and appeared in different places. Scissors that were kept in the kitchen drawer and ended up under his bed. A wall clock that disappeared for days and then returned to the same place. Once my silver rosary that I got from my late mother disappeared for a whole week. I looked everywhere. I even prayed to St. Anthony, patron of lost things. When I had already lost hope, I found it wrapped inside a sock at the bottom of Roger's drawer. "Why did you take my rosary, son?" I asked, trying to show irritation. He looked at me in that empty way that sometimes gave me chills. I didn't take anything. Someone must have put it there. Joseph didn't have the same patience as I did. "You can't lie, boy. If you took it, you have to own up. We don't raise children to be liars." That was the first time I saw him look at Joseph with real anger. A hard look. Too adult for an 11-year-old boy. Then he left, slamming the door to his room, and spent the rest of the day not speaking to us. I also began to notice that Roger spent a lot of time alone. Joseph bought him a video game for his 12th birthday, saved for months to be able to give this present. But instead of playing the normal things that boys his age played, he spent hours locked in his room with games I didn't really understand. Once I entered suddenly to bring a snack and the game he was playing seemed too violent. There was blood on the screen. Horrible things. He closed everything the moment he saw me. "What game is that, Roger?" I asked, putting the plate with cake on the small table. "Nothing, Mom. It's just an adventure game. I talked to Joseph about this, but he said I was exaggerating. Boys that age just like that stuff. Action. Fighting. You protect the kid too much, G. He has to learn to be a man." Sometimes Roger took longer than normal to return from school. He said he had stayed in the library studying, or that he had gone to a friend's house. I believed him for a good while until the day the school coordinator called our house asking about Roger, who had been absent for 3 days in a row. "What do you mean absent?" "He leaves every day in uniform with his backpack." I answered, feeling the blood freeze in my veins. "Mrs. Miller, your son hasn't shown up here for 3 days. I thought he might be sick. When he came home that day at the normal time, as if he had come from school, I confronted him first. He denied it, said the school had made a mistake. When I showed him the note from the coordinator, he changed his story. Yes, he had gone to school, but some boys were bullying him. So, he decided to skip class." "Why didn't you tell me, son?" I could have helped you talk to the administration, because you wouldn't understand, he shouted in a way he had never done before. You think everyone is as good as you, that everyone wants to help? That's not how the world works. Joseph, who was coming home from work at that moment, heard the shouting and came to see what was happening. When I explained, he turned red with anger. It was the first time I saw my husband raise his hand to hit Roger, but I got in the way. No, Joseph, hitting doesn't solve anything. This boy needs limits, Gertrude. Don't you see what's happening? He's lying to us, skipping school. God knows what else he's doing out there. Roger took advantage of our argument and ran out, slamming the front door hard. He only returned in the early morning when we had already called the police. He entered without making noise, but I was awake in the living room waiting. When I turned on the light, I was shocked. His clothes were dirty with dirt. He had a scratch on his face, and his eyes seemed to belong to someone else. Dilated, wild. "Where have you been?" I asked, holding him by the shoulders. We went crazy with worry. "Around," he answered, avoiding eye contact. "I need a shower." The next day I found a lighter and a pack of cigarettes in his pants pocket when I was doing laundry. I cried all day in hiding. What was happening to that boy I loved so much? Where had I gone wrong that he was pulling away from us like this? We went through a difficult phase. Joseph thought we needed to be tougher, set punishments, take away privileges. I still tried to talk to understand what was going on in his head. I even took him to a psychologist at the community centre, but he didn't open his mouth in the 3 sessions I managed to get him to attend. "Your son has a lot of anger stored up, Mrs. Miller," the doctor told me after the last appointment. "Children who have gone through abandonment like him often have problems with attachment, with trust. He may be testing you to see if you'll also abandon him like his biological mother did." That made sense. I decided I would have more patience, show him that no matter what he did, we were his family now and forever. Joseph didn't agree much with this approach, but he ended up giving in. "You always had a better way with the boys anyway," he said in that way of his, of someone who doesn't like to admit he doesn't know what to do. It was around this time that I began to notice changes in Roger's body. He was already 13, entering adolescence. His voice deepening, pimples appearing on his face, arms and legs growing so fast that his clothes became too small in the blink of an eye. Along with these changes came a sudden interest in looking good. He, who never cared about what he wore, now wanted brand name clothes, expensive sneakers that we could barely afford. "Trying to impress some girl, huh?" Joseph joked one day when he appeared in the kitchen with his hair all fixed up with gel. His face turned as red as a tomato, but he didn't answer. It was also around this time that I noticed the magazines. I had found them under his mattress when I was changing the sheets. Magazines with naked women, those really indecent ones. At first, I was shocked, but then I thought maybe it was normal for a boy that age. Still, it bothered me. These weren't the usual magazines that teenagers tended to have. These were more extreme, if you understand what I mean. I showed them to Joseph, who shrugged. "Leave the boy alone, G. Every young man that age has curiosity. Better that than doing something wrong out there." But it wasn't just that. I began to notice that Roger looked at me in a way that made me uncomfortable. At first, I thought it was just in my head. I was already almost 50 at the time, hair starting to go grey, the body of a mother who had already given birth to 2 children. It couldn't be possible that there was something strange in his look. It must have just been my concern, the imagination of a silly old woman, until the day I entered the bathroom without knocking. The door wasn't even fully closed and found him with a photo of me in his hand, an old photo from when I was younger that sat in a frame in the living room. He was so startled that he dropped the photo on the floor. The glass of the frame broke. "What are you doing, Roger?" I asked, confused. "Nothing, just thought the photo was pretty," he answered, running out and pushing me in the process. I stood there, feeling a chill down my spine that I couldn't explain. That wasn't normal. Something wrong was happening, but I couldn't admit it, not even to myself what it might be. When Roger turned 14, things got even worse. He practically didn't stay at home anymore. He left early, said he was going to school, but rarely actually went. He came back late, sometimes smelling of cigarettes, sometimes with a strange, lost look. Joseph and I fought almost every night because of this. My husband wanted stricter rules. He even wanted to send him back to the orphanage. I despaired just thinking about it. He's our son now, Joseph. We don't return a son like he's a purchase that went wrong. But don't you see the boy is losing himself? He doesn't respect us, doesn't respect the rules of the house. What more do you want to happen to understand that the situation is out of control? Deep down, I think I knew he was right. But my mother's heart didn't want to accept it. I had promised that boy I would never abandon him, that he was my son forever. How could I go back on that? That's when the money started disappearing. First, it was a little 50 from Joseph's wallet that he thought he had spent and forgotten. Then, 100 from my grocery envelope. When my sister-in-law's pension money that I kept for her every month disappeared from the drawer of the dresser, there was no more denying it. I confronted Roger one afternoon when he came home. It was already 1994. He was 15. And that skinny, scared boy had transformed into a tall, strong young man with a look that alternated between empty and defiant. "Did you take Aunt Clara's money?" I asked directly without beating around the bush. "What money?" he answered, throwing his backpack on the sofa and going straight to the refrigerator. "You know very well what money. 400 that were in my drawer. Your Aunt Clara's pension money that I keep for her." He turned to me with a can of soda in his hand, and for the first time I saw a smile that frightened me. A cold, mocking smile. "And if I did take it, what are you going to do?" I was speechless for a few seconds. That wasn't my Roger. It wasn't the boy I had raised with so much love over the last 6 years. It was a stranger in front of me using my son's body. "Why are you doing this, son? If you needed money, you just had to ask. We don't have much, but we always find a way." "I'm not your son," he interrupted with a voice so cold it seemed adult. "I never was. You're the one who made up this whole story in your head." Those words were like a stab in the chest. I felt my legs weaken. I had to lean on the table to avoid falling. The tears came without me being able to control them. "Don't talk like that, Roger. I love you like a son. Yes, from the very first day." "Love." He laughed. That strange laugh that didn't seem like his. "Love doesn't exist, Mommy. Dearest, people just want to use each other. Just like you and Joseph used me to pretend you're the good Samaritans, the saviors of the orphan boy." He passed by me and went to his room, leaving me there, destroyed by those words. What had happened to him? What had I done wrong? Where was that sweet boy who, despite all the problems, had moments of affection, of gratitude? That day I cried like I had never cried before. Joseph found me like that when he came home from work. And just by looking at me, he knew something serious had happened. After I told him everything, my husband was silent for a long time, smoking one cigarette after another on the porch. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired. "He needs professional help, Gert. The kind of help we can't give. Maybe we should look for a specialized institution." "No," I screamed, desperate. "We're not going to abandon him. He's just confused, lost. It's adolescence. It will pass." Joseph shook his head with that expression of someone who knew more than he said. My husband was always a man of few words, but of much observation. "There's something wrong with him, Gertrude. Something beyond being a teenager, beyond having been abandoned. There's something broken inside that boy. Something that maybe not even all our love can fix." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay thinking about everything that had happened in the last few years. The small signs I had ignored, the behavior changes, the strange looks, the increasingly bigger lies. Was Joseph right? Was there something in Roger that went beyond what we could understand or help? What I didn't know was that in just a few weeks, I would have the answer in the worst possible way. An answer that would come on a night that would change everything. that would break our family in a way that could never be repaired. You know, my dear, there's an old saying that you only truly know a person when you share the same roof. And that's what happened with Roger. The more time he spent in our house, the more I felt like there was a stranger living with us, not my son. In the winter of 1994, things started getting even stranger. Roger was already 15 with a man's body. Deep voice, but his head seemed to belong to someone I didn't know. There were days when he would come home and be that affectionate boy I had met at the orphanage. He would ask for my blessing, help Joseph fix something in the yard, do his school homework. In those hours, my heart would fill with hope. I thought everything would get better, that it was just a difficult phase. But there were other days. My God, how to explain? It was as if he were another person. He would arrive with red eyes, a different walk, a closed face, and lock himself in his room for hours. If I or Joseph tried to talk, he would explode in anger, slam doors, break things. Once he threw his plate of food against the wall just because I asked him to turn down the volume of the music. "What's happening to you, son?" I would ask, crying as I cleaned up the shards of glass and the food scattered across the wall. "Nothing you would understand," he would always respond with that empty look that gave me chills. It was during this time that I began to notice the marks on his arms. At first, I thought it was from street fights. God knows he was always getting into trouble in the neighborhood. But one day when I entered his room without knocking to leave clean clothes, I saw him injecting something into his arm. I was paralyzed at the door. The pile of t-shirts fell from my hands. He turned to me with eyes wide with shock, then anger. "Get out of here!" he shouted, jumping up from the bed. I ran to my room, locked the door, and called Joseph at work. My husband dropped everything and came home that same hour. When he arrived, Roger had already left, taking his backpack. We sat in the kitchen, not knowing what to do. "We have to send him to rehab, G," Joseph said, running his hand over his tired face. "This has gone beyond limits. The boy is using drugs inside our house." I still tried to defend him, to say that maybe it was just cold medicine, a vitamin injection, anything that wasn't what I knew it was. But deep down, I had also understood. My adopted son, that boy I had promised to love and protect, had become an addict. Roger only returned 2 days later. He looked like a zombie. Thin, deep circles under his eyes, shaking with cold even though it was a warm summer night. Joseph held him by the arms, made him sit at the kitchen table. For the first time, I saw my husband crying as he spoke. "Look what you're doing to yourself, son. Look what you're doing to your mother. She doesn't sleep, doesn't eat, stays by the window waiting for you to return." For a moment it seemed like something changed in Roger's gaze, a shadow of guilt, perhaps even shame. But it passed quickly. "You don't understand," he murmured. "Nobody understands." "Then explain so we can understand," I begged, holding his hands between mine. They were cold as ice, his fingers hurt, his nails dirty. "What's happening to you? Since when did this begin? Why?" He remained silent for a time, looking at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "You think you know who I am, but you don't. Nobody does." "Then tell us," Joseph insisted. "We're your family. We want to help." Roger raised his eyes, and what I saw there frightened me. A mix of anger and something that seemed like pleasure in seeing us suffer. Family. He laughed in that cold way he had acquired. "This isn't a family. It's just a convenient arrangement. You wanted a child to replace the ones who left, and I needed a roof." Those words were like stab wounds. I knew it wasn't true, that we loved Roger like a true son. But it hurt to hear that. "That's not true," Joseph answered with a firmer voice. "You are our son. Yes. And that's exactly why we're going to seek help for you. Tomorrow itself, I'm taking you to a place that treats addicts." "I'm not going anywhere," Roger yelled, rising from the table with such force that he knocked over the chair. "You don't control me. You're not my real parents." And he left, slamming the front door so hard that the picture frame on the wall fell. Joseph ran after him, but he had already disappeared into the darkness. That night, we decided that when he returned, we would commit him, even against his will. We had no choice anymore. But he didn't return the next day or the day after. A whole week passed, and still no sign of Roger. We looked everywhere, hospitals, police stations, the houses of the few friends we knew. Nobody had any news. Even some boys who lived on the street under the bridge said they had seen him around there. But it had been days since he had disappeared. It was one of the worst moments of my life. Guilt was eating me up inside. Where had I gone wrong? What could I have done differently? Why hadn't I seen the signs earlier? Each night that passed without news was a torment, imagining my son on the street suffering from cold hunger, using those drugs that were destroying him from the inside. It's not your fault, G. Joseph tried to console me, but I saw the same suffering in his eyes. We did the best we could. Almost 2 weeks later, at dinner time, we heard knocks on the door. When Joseph opened it, there was Roger, but not the same one who had left. He seemed to have aged years in those 2 weeks, even thinner, with an ugly cut on his eyebrow, his clothes dirty and torn. But the worst were his eyes, glazed, lost. "Son," I screamed, running to hug him. He could barely stand. "What did they do to you?" He didn't answer, just fell into my arms, heavy as lead. Joseph helped carry him inside. We laid him on the sofa. He was burning with fever, shaking. I wanted to call an ambulance, but Joseph thought it better not to. If they discover he's using drugs, they'll call the police. It could make the situation worse. We'll take care of him here. I spent the whole night at Roger's side, changing the cold compresses on his forehead, making him drink water, holding him while he vomited everything he tried to swallow. In the early morning, at the worst of the fever, he began to hallucinate. He called for his real mother. He shouted for someone to stop hitting him, cried like a small child. It was there, listening to those delusions, that I began to put the pieces together, the things we didn't know about his past, the traumas buried deep that no love could heal alone. He murmured names he had never mentioned while awake, spoke of things he had seen, that he had suffered. My mother's heart tightened with each revelation. How much pain this boy so young had already carried. In the morning, the fever subsided a bit. He woke up, looked around, confused, then saw me sitting in the chair beside him. "Mom," he called with a voice that seemed again like that 9-year-old boy who had arrived home with a small backpack. "You're still here." "I'm here, son," I answered, holding his hand. "I won't leave your side." For a moment I saw a tear roll down his face. For the first time in a long time, he really seemed like the Roger I knew, not that stranger who had taken over his body. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't want to. I didn't want to hurt you. I know, son. I know, but now we're going to help you. Everything will be all right. How wrong I was, my dear. Things would never be all right again." Because what I didn't know was that that moment of lucidity, of repentance, was just a pause before the storm that would come, a storm that would change our lives forever. During the days that followed, we cared for Roger at home. The withdrawal was horrible to watch. He sweated cold, shook, vomited, even had convulsions. Joseph wanted to take him to the hospital, but I was afraid they would commit him to a place worse than what we were already going through, or that they would send him back to some government institution. So we cared for him right there, Joseph and I taking turns so as not to leave him alone for a single minute. Little by little, he got better. Colour returned to his face. His appetite appeared, the tremors diminished, and with this physical improvement, a change in behaviour as well. He seemed like the Roger from before, polite, even affectionate. He apologised for what he had done, thanked us for the care, promised that he would change, that he would never use drugs again or steal from us. And we, fools that we were, believed him. Joseph even took a week off from work to keep an eye on him, ensure he didn't go out alone, that he didn't return to the same path. But then he had to go back. Life doesn't stop just because we have a problem, right, my dear? The bills kept coming. Food needed to be bought, rent paid. In the first weeks of October, everything seemed to be getting back on track. Roger had returned to school, came home at the right time, did his work, even started helping around the house. He mowed the neighbour's lawn to earn some money, washed dishes without being asked. We were even planning to enroll him in a technical course the following year. Give the boy a profession. One night we were having dinner, the three of us together, like we hadn't done in a long time. When Roger looked at me with those big eyes, now clean of drugs, and said something I'll never forget. "Mum, you always wanted to know why I started using drugs." Joseph and I suddenly became tense. It was a subject we had been avoiding, afraid of bringing back bad memories, of awakening that other Roger who frightened us so much. "Only if you want to talk about it, son," I answered cautiously. "I do want to." "I think you deserve to know." He took a deep breath. "It was because of my real mother, not the one who died of an overdose when I was little. That's a lie they made up at the orphanage. My mother abandoned me when I was 4 years old, left me at the door of a church with a note. Never knew why." My heart tightened hearing that. So many years, and I had never been able to get him to talk about the past. Afterward, I went from family to family, from orphanage to orphanage. In one of them, there was an employee. He stopped, swallowed hard. He did things to the children, bad things. Joseph put down his fork, his face turning red with anger. I felt nausea rising in my throat. That's why when you adopted me, I couldn't trust. I couldn't believe that someone would really want to keep me, take care of me, without wanting anything in return. He wiped a tear with the back of his hand. Then at school I met some older boys. They gave me this stuff to use, said it would make the pain go away. And for a while it really worked. When I was high, I didn't remember anything, didn't feel anything. I got up from the table, went around, and hugged my son with all the strength I had. Joseph came too, putting his hand on his shoulder. For the first time, it seemed like we had broken down a barrier, reached the real Roger. That hurt boy who desperately needed love, but didn't know how to receive it. "Everything's going to be all right now, son," I promised, kissing the top of his head. "We're going to help you overcome this together as a family." That night, I lay down next to Joseph with a heart full of hope. Finally, we had understood what was happening with our son. Finally, we could truly help. "I think things will get better now," I told my husband while turning off the light. He opened his heart to us. Joseph was silent for a while, then sighed. "I hope so, G, but I don't know. There's something in his eyes that still worries me. It's trauma, Joseph. The boy went through things we can't even imagine. It will take time, but he'll get better. You'll see." I rested my head on my husband's chest and fell asleep, feeling a peace I hadn't felt in years. Little did I know it would be the last night of peace we would have in that house. Because less than a week later, what would happen was something I never, even in my worst nightmares, imagined could happen under my own roof. It was the end of October 1994, a Thursday that started like so many others. The day had been hot in that muggy way that makes us in River Creek know a storm is coming. Roger had gone to school in the morning, returned at the right time, even had dinner with us. Rice, beans, and a chicken stew I had made. He was quiet, but that wasn't news. Since our conversation about his past, he would get like this sometimes, immersed in his own thoughts. Joseph mentioned during dinner that the next day he would need to leave earlier for work. There was a big shipment coming to the grain elevator, and he, as supervisor, needed to be there before everyone else. I remember Roger looking at my husband in a strange way when he said this, but at the time I didn't give it importance. Before continuing the story, remember to like this story and subscribe to this channel. Thank you all for watching me. After dinner, Roger said he was going to his room to study for a test. Joseph stayed in the living room watching the news on television. I cleaned the kitchen and went to take a shower. It was our normal routine, nothing different from any other night. Around 10 Sard, Joseph came to the bedroom. He was tired and soon fell asleep. I still stayed up for a bit, praying the rosary as I did every night, thanking that things finally seemed to be getting on track. I fell asleep to the sound of the rain that had started to fall outside. A heavy rain with thunderstorms, the kind that makes you curl up under the covers, grateful to have a roof over your head. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up, maybe 3, 4 in the morning. The rain had stopped, but the air was still humid, heavy. I opened my eyes with that strange sensation that someone was watching me. You know that chill on the back of your neck that you feel when something is wrong? At first, I thought it was just an impression that I had woken up from some nightmare I didn't remember. But then I saw a shadow moving in the bedroom. Startled, I thought it was a burglar who had entered through the window. I was about to scream to wake Joseph when the shadow came closer to the bed, and I realized with my heart almost stopping that it was Roger. He was standing beside my bed, looking at me in a way I will never forget in my life. It wasn't the look of my son. It was the look of a stranger, of someone I didn't know. Cold, empty, but at the same time too intense. "Roger," I called softly, confused. "What is it, son? Are you feeling sick?" He didn't answer, just continued looking at me in that way that froze my soul. It was then that I noticed he was without a shirt, just in shorts. And when my eyes adjusted more to the dark, I noticed something that made me stop breathing. He was aroused in a way no mother should see her son. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling with fear. I tried to sit up in bed to move away, but with a quick movement he placed his hand over my mouth, preventing me from screaming. "Don't wake Joseph," he whispered, coming closer. "I don't want to hurt him." The terror I felt at that moment cannot be explained in words. It was my son, that boy I had raised with so much love that I had promised to protect. And there he was, like a wild beast about to attack its own mother. I tried to struggle to push him away, but Roger was strong, much stronger than I had ever imagined. With one movement, he climbed on the bed on top of me. I felt his weight immobilizing me, his hand pressing on my mouth so hard I could barely breathe. "I always wanted to do this," he whispered in my ear, words that made me want to vomit. "Since the first day I came to this house, you didn't notice how I looked at you, how I followed you around the house." Tears streamed down my face as I desperately tried to wake Joseph, who was sleeping on the other side of the bed, but my husband always had a heavy sleep, never woke up easily. In my terrified eyes, I begged Roger to stop, to go back to being the boy I knew that I loved. For an instant, it seemed like he hesitated. I saw a flash of confusion pass through his eyes, as if for a second he had come back to himself. But soon that empty look returned, and he began to pull the sheet that covered me. It was at that moment that Joseph finally woke up. Maybe from the movement on the bed, maybe from the sixth sense that only a father has. I don't know. I only know that suddenly I heard my husband's voice, confused at first, then loaded with a horror I had never heard before. "What the hell is this?" Joseph shouted, sitting up in bed with a jump. Roger turned his head, startled, but didn't get off of me. It was as if something had broken inside him for good, as if that last thread of humanity that still remained had snapped. "Get off of her!" Joseph roared, jumping on top of Roger with a strength I didn't know my 55-year-old husband still had. The two fell to the floor with a dull thud knocking over the lamp from the bedside table. I heard screams, sounds of struggle, things breaking. I turned on the bedroom light with trembling hands and saw a scene I will never forget. Joseph and Roger rolling on the floor. My husband trying to immobilize our son, who was thrashing like a wild animal. "Call the police!" Joseph shouted to me while trying to hold Roger's arms. "Go, Gertrude! Call the police!" But I was paralyzed in shock, unable to believe what was happening. How had we reached that point? How had the boy I had promised to love and protect transformed into that monster? With a sudden movement, Roger managed to break free from Joseph. I saw my son grab something from the floor, the broken lamp, and before I could shout a warning, he hit my husband's head with all his might. Joseph fell backward, a trickle of blood running down his forehead. He wasn't unconscious, but too dazed to react. Roger stood up, looking from his father to me with a smile that didn't seem human. "See what you made me do?" he said, pointing to Joseph bleeding on the floor. "If you had stayed quiet, none of this needed to happen. That voice wasn't the voice of my Roger. It was the voice of someone or something that had taken over him." At that moment, an instinct I didn't know I had awakened inside me. I jumped from the bed, ran past Roger and managed to get out to the hallway. "Help!" I screamed, running toward the front door. "Someone help me!" Roger came after me but stumbled on the furniture in the dark living room. I managed to reach the door, unlock it with trembling fingers, and run out into the street, still in my nightgown. The night was cold and damp after the rain, but I barely felt the cold. I just ran like I had never run before, screaming for help. It was Mr. Arnold, our neighbour from across the street, who came out first, then Mrs. Louise from the house next door. Soon there were half a dozen neighbours in the street, confused, frightened by the woman in a nightgown, screaming in desperation in the middle of the night. "My son, my husband, please, someone call the police." Mr. Arnold and his oldest son, a strong young man who worked as a security guard, ran to our house. Roger had disappeared, jumped over the back fence. We discovered later Joseph was sitting on the living room sofa, holding a cloth against the cut on his forehead, pale and trembling. The police arrived almost half an hour later. In those days, in a small town, things took longer. Sheriff Oswald knew our family for years. He couldn't believe it when we told him what had happened. "Are you sure, Mrs. Miller? Roger, that quiet boy. How do you explain to someone that your own son, who you raised for 6 years, had tried? I couldn't even say the word. How do you admit that that boy, who everyone saw as shy and polite, hid a side that not even we, who lived under the same roof, completely knew?" They searched the entire town, but Roger had vanished. Joseph was taken to the small River Creek hospital, where they gave him some stitches on his forehead and prescribed tranquilizers for both of us. When we returned home in the morning, it looked like a hurricane had passed through. Broken furniture, glass all over the floor, bloodstains on the bedroom carpet. But the worst wasn't the physical mess. It was the feeling that something had been irreparably destroyed. Our family, our trust, our sense of security. For days I couldn't sleep properly. Every noise in the night made me jump from the bed, thinking it was him returning. Joseph, my husband, always so strong, was also destroyed. It wasn't just the physical wound. It was the wound in his soul. The feeling that we had failed as parents, that we hadn't been able to see the evil growing under our own roof. 3 days passed without news until one afternoon the phone rang. It was Sheriff Oswald, Mrs. Miller. We found Roger. My heart raced. For a moment that maternal instinct that never completely dies took over me, and I could only think if he was okay, if he was hurt. "Where? How is he?" There was a silence on the other end of the line, and then the sheriff's grave voice. "He's alive, but he's not well, Mrs. Miller. We found him in an abandoned house near the train station. He had used a lot of drugs. Seems like he tried to kill himself." The world seemed to stop for an instant. Despite everything that had happened, he was my son, the boy I had promised never to abandon. "We took him to the hospital first," the sheriff continued. "Then he'll be transferred to the psychiatric hospital in Grand Rapids. The doctors think he has serious mental problems beyond the chemical dependency." I don't know how I finished that call, nor how I managed to tell Joseph what had happened. I only know that that same afternoon we went to visit Roger in the hospital. He was handcuffed to the bed, sedated, his eyes half closed. He didn't seem to recognize us. Or maybe he was pretending. I remember holding his hand, cold and lifeless, and crying until I had no more tears. "Why, son?" I asked, even knowing there would be no answer. "Why?" The next day he was transferred to the psychiatric hospital. We were authorized to visit him a week later. It was a sad place with white peeling walls full of people with lost gazes wandering the corridors. A doctor received us before the visit, a young man with deep circles under his eyes and already thinning hair. "Your son has a complex condition," he explained, leafing through a folder. "Schizophrenia, antisocial personality disorder. Besides the chemical dependency, he probably already had these problems when you adopted him, but they were manifesting gradually, aggravated by the drug use." I remained silent, absorbing those difficult words that tried to explain how our son had transformed into a stranger before our eyes. "Does he remember what he did?" Joseph asked, his voice. The doctor adjusted his glasses. Yes and no. He alternates moments of lucidity in which he seems remorseful with others, in which he denies everything or says you deserved it. It's characteristic of his condition. He can't maintain a coherent line of thought. When we finally entered the room where Roger was, I barely recognized my son. He had lost even more weight. His face was hollow with deep circles under his eyes, his hair cut very short. He was sitting on the bed, looking out the barred window. "Son," I called cautiously. He turned his head slowly. For an instant, I thought I saw a glimpse of the old Roger in those eyes, the frightened boy who had arrived at our house 6 years earlier. But soon that empty, distant look took over again. "What do you want here?" he asked, his voice monotonous, without emotion. "We came to see how you are," Joseph answered, keeping his distance. I noticed that my husband couldn't look at Roger the same way anymore. Something had broken forever between them. Roger gave a dry laugh without humour. "Now it's too late to worry, don't you think?" "It's never too late, son," I said, still trying to reach some part of him that might be intact. "You're sick, but you'll get better." "And when I get better, what then?" he interrupted, his voice becoming more agitated. "I'll go back home. We'll be a happy family again after what I did." I had no answer for that because deep down I knew it was true. Nothing would be the same again. Even if one day he got better, even if one day we could forgive, the scars would be permanent. That was the last time we saw Roger. A few weeks later, he was transferred to a custodial hospital in Detroit, a place for criminals with mental illness. The judge determined he would stay there for an indeterminate time until he was cured, if that ever happened. Joseph and I returned home to a life that seemed empty, meaningless. Our house, which had once been a place full of hope, now seemed haunted by memories. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall told a different story, but they all ended the same painful way. We tried to move forward, but we were never the same. Joseph, my strong husband, who never showed weakness, began to drink more than normal. At night, I heard him walking around the house, checking the locks, looking under the beds as if he still expected to find some monster hiding. I myself began to have terrible nightmares. I would wake up screaming in a cold sweat, and always the same question tormented me. How did we not see? How did we not realize there was something so wrong happening right under our noses? Were we so desperate to save that boy that we refused to see the signs? Today, sitting on this old porch watching the grand river that continues to flow as if nothing had happened, I can look back with a bit more clarity. More than 30 years have passed since that terrible night. Time doesn't heal all wounds, as they say, but it teaches us to live with the scars. Joseph, my husband, passed away in 2003 from a heart attack. He was never the same after that night. He carried a guilt that wasn't his until his last day. "I should have noticed, G," he would say sometimes, usually after a few drinks. "I should have protected you." Our biological children, Paul and Margaret, tried to support us as best they could, but they lived far away. They had their own families, their own problems. And to be honest, I think they also felt a bit of guilt for not being there when everything happened, for having left their aging parents alone with that troubled boy. As for Roger, we received news of him from time to time through social services. I know he's still institutionalized after so many years. He had better periods. worse periods. In 2008, he was evaluated for possible release, but had a violent relapse and returned to intensive treatment. The last letter I received about him about 2 years ago said he was stable, medicated, participating in therapy activities, but he will never truly be free. Neither from the institution nor from the demons he carries inside him. I didn't visit him anymore, not when Joseph died, not on important dates. Some might judge me for this, think that I abandoned my son when he needed me most. But the truth is that I couldn't look at him without reliving that night, without feeling that terror again. And yet, my dear, even after everything, I still feel a pain in my chest when I think of him. Not of the Roger from that terrible night, but of the 9-year-old boy with the big, frightened eyes, with the small backpack containing everything he had in the world. The boy who, for a brief period, was truly my son. With time, I learned some things I want to share with you. Maybe it will help some mother, some father who is going through a similar situation. God willing, it won't be as extreme as ours. First, I understood that love doesn't cure everything. We grow up hearing that a mother's love can move mountains, overcome any obstacle. It's not true. Some wounds are too deep. Some problems need professional help, medicine, serious treatment. Love is important. Fundamental even, but it's not enough. Second, I learned to recognize signs. Today, when I see a young person with behavior similar to what Roger began to show, I feel a chill down my spine. The empty looks, the abrupt mood changes, the cruelty toward animals or weaker people, the increasingly bigger lies, the growing isolation. They are warnings that life gives us and that we need to take seriously. Third, I understood that we should never ignore our instinct. That little voice inside us that says something is wrong doesn't speak in vain. How many times did I feel there was something strange in Roger's look in the way he followed me around the house? How he took my things in secret, but I ignored it because I didn't want to believe because it was easier to pretend everything was fine. Fourth, I learned that some people come into the world with something broken inside them. It's not the parents' fault. It's not the environment's fault. It's something in their very constitution. Of course, abandonment, abuse, traumas make everything worse, as in Roger's case. But some souls are born with a darkness that not all the love in the world can illuminate. Finally, I understood that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or trusting again. I forgave Roger in the sense of not carrying hatred for him, of understanding that he was sick, that he didn't have total control over his actions. But that doesn't mean I could trust him again or put other people at risk because of a feeling of guilt or maternal duty. In the years that followed that night, I met other families who went through similar situations. Not exactly the same, but with children who had serious mental problems, who became violent, dangerous. It's more common than we imagine, but nobody talks about it. It seems there's a conspiracy of silence, as if admitting your child could be a threat were the biggest failure a mother could have. We even formed a support group here in River Creek. We meet once a month at the church. We share our stories, our pains, our small victories. It helps to know we're not alone, that other mothers also carry this silent burden. Today, at 76 years old, I look back and see a life marked by this tragedy, but not defined by it. I had moments of joy, too. Paul's wedding, the birth of my grandchildren, Margaret's visits when she manages to come from Chicago. Life continues even when it seems impossible to move forward. If you're going through something similar, if you have a child with mental problems who is becoming a threat, don't be ashamed to seek help. Don't wait until it's too late, as I waited. Don't let love blind you to the real dangers. And remember, you're not a bad mother for recognizing that your son needs more help than you can give. Oh, my dear, if you like this story, even being so sad, don't forget to subscribe to the Grandparents' Tales channel. Just click the button right below the video. And if you want to talk with other people who follow our stories, leave a comment below. Remember, my dear, Wisdom doesn't come from books. It comes from the scars that life leaves. And we old folks have many scars and many stories still to tell. Some good, some bad, but all true. All part of this great journey that is living. Sometimes we spend years crossing paths with the same people and never imagine what they've lived through, what they've done to survive. Each wrinkled face like mine hides 1,000 stories, 1,000 silent battles. And if my story can help someone not go through what I went through, it will have been worth sharing this old pain. Thank you for listening to me, for letting me get this off my chest. May God protect you and your family and keep evil far from your